Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Lorenz.
Here.
Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Nowak.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Here.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong.
Here.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
And Chair Galloway.
Present.
Thank you.
And let it be noted that this is the first time in at least 2 years that all members of council, I think it's the first time in 2 years, that all members of council are present here in the chamber, and it is likely the last time this group is going to be together in the chamber. So welcome to you all. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. I'll now ask for a motion and a seconder to reconvene in open session. Councillor Kiefer, Councillor Foxton, all in favor? And that's carried. We're not using the electronic voting at this point. Any declaration of pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none, we have no presentations. We do, however, have a number of delegations. We have 5 delegations. I would like, however, to have Mr. Regier do the staff presentation, or at least introduce the matter related to Bill 23.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. And we do have a presentation deck, and my colleague Craig Dyer and I will present together, as there are some significant financial implications for Bill 23. So if I can have the presentation brought up. As we get set up, there's no doubt that Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act, makes significant changes to regional planning and, well, many aspects of regional governance and finance. Next slide, please. We'll just, this presentation will briefly go over the background, an overview of the legislative goals, implications for the region, and the staff, a summary of the staff response, and we'll have opportunities for questions afterwards. Next slide, please. So going back to December 2021, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing appointed a housing affordability task force whose mandate it was to recommend ways to accelerate the progress in closing the housing supply gap and to improve housing affordability. The task force released a report in February of 22 that included a series of 55 recommendations to increase future housing supply. On October 25th, 2022, the province released the proposed legislation under the More Homes Built Faster Act 2022, Bill 23, which introduces legislative changes to the Planning Act, the Development Charges Act, the Heritage Act, and the Conservation Authorities Act to address the issue of the need for more homes. It supports the goal recommended by the Housing Affordability Task Force to build 1.5 million homes over the next 10 years. Bill 23 fundamentally changes the region's corporate role in planning and, in turn, how we build our community. Next slide, please. So, in summary, the Act aims to make changes in the land use planning system to allow for building more homes, reducing the cost and fees and taxes for the development of homes, streamlining development approvals, assisting home buyers and renters, and revising the planning systems in those respects. Next slide, please. So the Waterloo region, to put this into context, has been a leader in land use planning over the last number of decades. The very first regional plan put in place in 1976 actually outlined some of the fundamental structures that we've come to be familiar with in the Waterloo region, including things like the Central Transit Corridor. The planning policies that were put in place with the last regional official plan set the stage for the development of ION LRT and the intensification of our Central Transit Corridor. We've seen the ROP introduce key concepts like the countryside line, the protected countryside, environmentally sensitive landscapes have been protected. The regional recharge area has been established to protect our groundwater supply, and we've established strong water protection policies through the ROP, and a focus on intensification that has surpassed our expectations are some of the examples of the role that the ROP has played over the last number of decades. There's strong community desire, as attested through the consultations for the last regional official plan amendment that was passed by council, adopted by council in August, to continue building on this leadership by ensuring the community vision for Waterloo region is fulfilled and results in equitable, thriving, and sustainable communities. In essence, the changes to the regional official plan would delegate all of those roles to the area municipalities in the region. Next slide, please. I'd like to pass it over to Craig now for here's a discussion on the implications for the region and development charges.
Thank you, Rod. As we've, and through you, Mr. Chair, as we've outlined in the report, I would say that our most significant concern from a development charge perspective is what we see to be a shift of the responsibility for the cost of building the infrastructure needed to support growth. And that shift is from the developers who are building both new residential and new non-residential development, a shift off of the development onto the existing taxpayers. And that I would say, exacerbates the current situation. Many, I think, have said that the Development Charges Act, as written, ensures that growth pays for growth. That is not the case. There are a number of provisions in the Act right now that prevent that from happening, and this will make it worse. So we would say that overall, if you consider the total cost of home ownership, not just the initial acquisition price, or cost rather, that home ownership will become less affordable and municipal fiscal capacity to build that infrastructure needed in order for the growth to happen will be impacted and will be limited. And the cost of home, the important part in terms of the cost of home ownership is that the shift onto existing tax and ratepayers will inevitably have an impact on property tax rates and user rates. So when we think about the long-term cost of owning a home, that will go up. And we know, and this, certainly this council is, I think, very aware of issues relating to development charges. We've been dealing with this on and off for a number of years. Some may recall the Bill 73 back in 2015, Bill 108 and 138 a couple of years ago. This seems to be the next step to move more costs off of the DC and onto existing growth. Onto the existing taxpayers. Next slide, please. So a short list, not necessarily 100% complete, but the main changes that are proposed through Bill 23 are a number of exemptions and mandatory discounts and phase-ins. I think of particular concern is the phase-in requirement, which would require, in the first year of a bylaw, a municipality would only be able to charge 80% of the maximum allowable rate. So we could easily be in a situation where in the first year of a new bylaw, our development charge would be lower than the last year of the preceding bylaw because of the phase-in requirements. There are certain costs right now that are eligible to be funded from development charges. That would change. Studies in particular, which exist throughout all of our programs. Think of watershed studies, think of master plans. These exist throughout all of our significant services. They'd no longer be eligible for DC funding, nor would the background study that's needed in order to calculate the rates in the first place. And of potentially great concern is a section that indicates that through regulation, the minister will prescribe a set of services for which land acquisition will no longer be an eligible DC expense. And when we think of our capital program, we think of the transportation capital program, the public transit capital program in particular. If those are the types of services they're going to target, that is of great concern to us. For those municipalities that have passed a housing development charge, that will no longer be an eligible service. And as this council is aware, this council has passed a couple of resolutions directing staff to look into a housing development charge when we do our next background study. That will no longer be possible. The interest rate on frozen and deferred development charges would be prescribed at a lower rate than most municipalities have in place right now. Increasing the historical service standard from 10 to 15 years. This one is a little bit technical, but the outcome would be undoubtedly a lower service standard, which would mean a reduction in a municipality's ability to collect development charges. And I'm thinking the two in our case that would likely be most impacted would be paramedic services and the Region of Waterloo International Airport, I think would be the most significant ones. And then spending allocations that may not align with municipal capital investments. DCs come in not on a smooth, even basis over the life of a bylaw. They're cyclical, as are the expenditures related to those development charges, and requiring an arbitrary spending allocation I think would just generally not align with municipal capital investments. Next slide, please. So here's the long list of items within the development charge. I've gone through most of these. The point of this slide is the right-hand column, which is that virtually all of the changes to the Development Charges Act would result in either deferred development charge collections or an outright reduction in municipal revenue. So that's when I speak of the shift onto existing taxpayers, it's all of these items and the cumulative impact of those items. Next slide, please. So if approved, Bill 23 would certainly result in reduced development charge revenue and therefore less capacity for municipalities to fund the infrastructure needed to support that development. As I've already indicated, it transfers costs onto existing taxpayers and ratepayers. It potentially delays the infrastructure projects needed to allow new housing to be built. Infrastructure projects could be deferred or canceled. This council has listened patiently many times as I've talked about the risk of issuing growth-related debt and the need for sufficient revenue to fund that debt in the future. That will be exacerbated. And more pressure, generally speaking, on municipal budgets and on municipal asset management plans. There probably couldn't be a worse time to do this, probably never a good time, but given the inflationary impacts that we're feeling and the rising cost of borrowing, this will add to an already immensely challenging budgets over the next term of council. Next slide, please. And then finally, my usual comments about municipal revenue. Municipalities operate in an environment where we have very limited revenue sources. Virtually everything that's proposed in terms of a change to the DCA will result in less revenue. I've gone through, I think, some of those possible outcomes already. And then the bottom point on that slide just reinforces the need for integrated planning, the work that the finance teams do with the planners, with the public works commissioners. We need to be able to plan financially for the long term. And we feel that the changes in this bill would certainly have an impact on our ability to do that. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mr. Regier.
In addition, Chair Galloway and members of the committee, there are significant changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, changes to the Heritage Act, and as well as changes to the Heritage Act. The changes to the Conservation Authorities Act have the effect of reducing the scope of Conservation Authority interests to floodplains and natural hazard lands. It limits the role of the agency to that of a commenting agency on planning matters. In terms of the changes to the Heritage Act, we see limiting the designations to properties already included on a municipal heritage registry. There is a requirement to remove currently listed properties on a registry on the Heritage Register if the designation is not pursued within 2 years of the Act coming into effect. And overall, we see the impact on environmental protection and heritage conservation to be a negative one. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides will deal with regional response that you see in summarized in the report. Next slide, please. The purpose of the bill is to put in place conditions to build more homes faster and more cost effectively. And I think it's fair to say that at a staff level, and I know the council has talked about this extensively, we're in support of that general direction, that objective. Aspects of Bill 23 will definitely support housing supply and affordability. Examples include requirements for as-of-right residential units, the streamlining of the development approvals process, and assignment of housing targets across municipalities. Next slide, please. Importantly, Bill 23 would eliminate the regional official plan. The regional official plan currently manages growth to support fiscally responsible infrastructure and provides the basis for the integration and coordination of planning and infrastructure across area municipalities in the Waterloo region. In the absence of an official plan, mechanisms for coordination of policies for the protection of the natural heritage system, agricultural and cultural heritage resources, the integration of land use and transportation planning, as I discussed earlier, and shared infrastructure would be required. Simply put, a strategic, integrated, big picture planning approach is critical to support our fast-growing urban and rural municipalities, including an adequate supply of land for housing. As proposed, Bill 23 presents gaps in the ability of the region and area municipalities to collaboratively and efficiently plan for an integrated approach to growth to support all the residents of the Waterloo region. Next slide, please. So further, abandoning the regionally integrated planning model may result in more urban sprawl, less environmental protection, less transit-oriented development, and less efficient development and use of strategic infrastructure. If Bill 23 is passed without the regional official plan, there may be a shift in how we collectively coordinate. There will need to be a shift in how we collectively coordinate growth that supports both urban and rural communities and leverages the integrated planning that we've done up to this point, and the infrastructure investments that we've made as a community to manage community-wide challenges like the growth of our airport, strategic identification of employment lands, and affordable housing. The Bill 23 creates the potential challenge of knowing how and when and where to build the correct amount of supporting infrastructure. For example, future stages of ION LRT would need to be integrated into planning policies that support intensification along the future routes. ION Phase 2, for example, has already been identified. Next slide, please. So collectively, there certainly are efficiencies to be gained in the development approval process. Some of those efficiencies are already underway. We have made progress in the delegation of planning approvals to area municipalities in the last little while. Discussions are ongoing with the City of Cambridge. Kitchener has had a full suite of delegations already for planning approvals. To continue this process as contemplated by Bill 23, there will be need for some sort of transitional process to allow for the development of capacity to support planning approvals through the area municipal planning divisions that are in place. Next slide, please. I think it's worthwhile putting a little bit of emphasis here on the role that the regional official plan plays in the protection of our water supply. The region of Waterloo is dependent on groundwater extensively. It's approximately 80% of our water supply. And the groundwater resources exist in all of the area municipalities in the region, but are fully integrated into a regional delivery system. A coordinated approach to the protection of our water supply and resources would be required in the absence of a regional official plan. Water supply has been efficiently and cost-effectively delivered across our 7 area municipalities. In the absence of a regional official plan, some other mechanism will have to be put in place to coordinate land use protections for groundwater resources. Next slide, please. As Mr. Dyer has mentioned, there is a possibility that the proposed legislation may unintentionally increase the cost of home ownership for all and reduce affordability by transferring the cost of delivering infrastructure and parkland, for example, from parkland dedication fees and development charges through to the tax base. There are potentially other funding mechanisms, but they have not been put in place as part of this legislation. Next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say, as Mr. Dyer had indicated, that Bill 23 will definitely impose difficult decisions regarding how and when to finance critical infrastructure to support growth in Waterloo region. Next slide, please. So in closing, the region of Waterloo is in full support of the province's objective of building more homes faster. We feel that there's an adequate supply of land. A lot of planning work has been done already to accommodate growth in the Waterloo region. Some of the measures that would be put in place through Bill 23 can help us deliver on some of those objectives. However, it's critical that a strategic, integrated, big picture planning approach support our fast-growing urban and rural communities, and including the delivery of an adequate supply of land for housing. And there are measures that could be taken through this legislation that could address some of the unintended consequences of the proposed legislation, which we think are important and have been outlined in the report. Next slide, please. So with that, we're available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rozier and Mr. Dyer. We'll entertain some questions now, but only of clarification of staff. I want to get to the delegations and then the discussion or debate subsequent to that. So questions of clarification only. Councillor Foxton?
In regards to further comment.
Okay, so we can hold that. Councillor Shantz?
Thank you. A question for Mr. Dyer about the cost, and I'm not sure if you can even answer this, but can you give us some kind of estimate, I suppose, of if the development charges were transferred to the tax levy, what kind of percentage increase in the tax levy would that look like?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think the best answer I can give right now is that we're working on it. And just to maybe just to highlight a couple of the challenges that we have are that various provisions, various changes to the Act come in place at various times. So some will be retroactive to June 1st of this year. Some will come into effect upon the Act receiving royal assent. Some will come into effect and the impacts will be clear the next time we do a development charge background study, which we're about to start and will take place over the course of next year. So there are some timing issues to work out, but what I can say is, working with other municipalities, we're trying to come up with a standard way of doing the calculations on some of these matters so that we can get a sense of what's happening in individual municipalities and indeed what's happening across the province. So more to come, and we hope to have some numbers relatively soon.
But it's substantial, for sure. Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple of clarifications. You talked about the listed heritage registry, and would all properties come off of that list after 2 years if no one asks for designation for a particular property?
Through you, Chair Galloway, I think Amanda Cutler is online, and I think she's in a good position to answer that question.
Amanda?
Sure, and I think that is my understanding. Sorry, that is my understanding. I think, though, when we did review the legislation, some of the impacts won't directly impact the work that the region does. Some impacts are more for the area municipalities, but that is my understanding.
Thank you. And a second question to Mr. Chair. Thank you for that answer. The other one was source water protection. If these changes go through, would there be one particular agency or government body that would be there to protect our water sources?
So through the chair to the councillor, the MECP has the Clean Water Act, which is used to protect our groundwater sources. And they will continue to do that, I'm assuming, through this endeavor. So we, as a municipality, have our own source water protection policies that we use to protect the groundwater.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark?
I've forgotten whether I'm using this mics correctly. I haven't used them in so long. Can you hear me? My question has to do with the changes to inclusionary zoning. I know that doesn't affect us, but if I understand it correctly, the lower tier municipalities' ability to use inclusionary zoning to create affordable housing is being significantly limited, including things like the duration of the affordability. Does this have any impact on the region's affordable housing initiatives? For instance, when we put out surplus land and we want to have affordable housing built on it, will we be limited to 20 years, or can we, say, use 40 years of affordability?
Through you, Chair Galloway, I don't believe that this would have any effect on the region's programs to utilize regionally owned land in particular. This really deals exclusively with the terms and conditions of inclusionary zoning, which would leverage development rights inside of major transit station areas for private sector development.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to the delegations. We have 5, and the first of those is Kevin Thomason. Welcome, Kevin. Are you over your jet lag yet, Kevin? I spoke to Kevin last week from Nairobi.
Crazy week. We're here. There we go. Green light. Excellent. Honorable mayors, councillors, and guests. My name is Kevin Thomason, and I originally signed up to delegate at this final council meeting many weeks ago for what was to be a huge thank you to the many long-serving politicians who would be completing their final terms. We were already celebrating years of service and incredible efforts, culminating in the visionary and sustainable regional official plan with 15-minute complete communities, continued intensification, more housing choice, affordability, the missing middle, active transportation, farmland preservation, leading environmental protections, and continue our smart growth trajectory that has made our region a global leader. However, with the introduction of the extremely concerning Provincial Bill 23 and its dire implications for the region of Waterloo, the nature of my delegation today has had to change dramatically. Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, and the ensuing changes to the ensuing changes to the Planning Act, Development Charges, Heritage Act, Conservation Authorities Act could destroy our visionary regional planning, most likely resulting actually in fewer homes that are far more expensive and far more unsustainable, while destroying our precious farmland and dramatically increasing municipal servicing costs. We are seeing our democratic processes being eliminated with the removal of public notice, ending of requirement for public meetings, and curtailing most ability for appeal. It is very disturbing to watch the province force massive amounts of unsustainable, unaffordable, and unnecessary urban sprawl on other neighboring municipalities while we await the verdict of our fate here, knowing that the Premier is taking our entire province in the absolute opposite direction of what is actually needed in a climate emergency, who begged the province to intervene in our regional official plan. We are now witnessing firsthand the destruction of our region and decimation of our leading planning that they encouraged. Yesterday, at COP27, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, warned that we're on a highway to hell with our foot on the accelerator, saying that the fight for a livable planet will be won or lost in this decade. That we have the tools and knowledge needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and live more sustainably. But we are in fact in the fight of our lives and we're losing. Our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. Our new regional official plan is the progressive, resilient, smart plan we need for the next 30 years, with our municipalities all unanimously agreeing to it. It is beyond confounding to see our Premier Doug Ford forcing municipalities across Ontario in the opposite direction, pandering to billionaire developers and putting profits for a few ahead of the greater public good, dooming us to thousands of hectares of irreplaceable farmland loss, encouraging the destruction of essential wetlands and flood controls, removing the safety nets and the very processes designed to protect our health and prosperity, the dismantling of our conservation authorities, the forced sell-off of environmentally protected lands, the destruction of the Greenbelt, the removal of democratic processes, no longer requiring public notice, and eliminating the right to appeal. It is all so wrong. We already have the visionary balanced plan that our community needs, that was almost unanimously approved just weeks ago, that will provide more housing than what the Premier is seeking, more affordably and with more housing choice and diversity, more rapidly and more sustainably. We can't fall victim to the misguided whims of Queen's Park and populist politicians working for friends instead of the greater public good. They aren't likely to still be in power in 3 years or 5 years, let alone 30 years, and don't represent the views or values of the vast majority of extremely concerned Canadians. We can't get distracted. We need to keep our focus on the long-term sustainable plan that we know is right for us, that will keep our communities on their current successful trajectory, unique in Ontario and leading the world. Simply look at our skyline, our booming universities and businesses, our farms that are the most profitable in the country, balanced by our leading environmental protections. No one can dispute the success that we're already achieving because we have a strong regional government together with progressive local municipalities that have done planning better than most others. We know that we are stronger working together than apart. And while there are those still even internally who seek to divide us, we would not have ION LRT, the countryside line, the protected countryside, environmentally sensitive landscapes, source water protection, our unique thriving local farms and the bounty of local food, and so many other things unique to our region without all the decades of progressive work of this regional council chamber. We need to send a loud, clear message that Bill 23 needs to be entirely repealed, that we already have a proven plan that will deliver more housing quantity, more housing diversity, more affordably, and more sustainably. We need the planning, the coordination, the shared infrastructure, and the efficiency that our regional government brings. The calls have been for more collaboration and more integration for things like regionalizing our police, our fire departments, economic development, and so many other services. It's absurd to be tearing apart and leaving it to our already cash-strapped municipalities to figure out how to fund it all. Having declared a climate emergency and with a pending food crisis, there is no need to doom our future. Market trends and what people can afford is clear. We are heading in the direction of needing less land, not more. Yet, there is a good chance that within a few weeks, we won't even have our visionary countryside line concept anymore, based on the draconian decisions being inflicted on Ottawa, Halton, and Hamilton. In conclusion, there is no shortage of greenfield homes in Waterloo region. Shifting trends and patterns have been clear for 20 years. There are hundreds of homes for sale right now, eager to find a buyer. What is being sought is more affordable apartments, duplexes, laneway homes, and accessory units of the missing middle that Bill 23 will do far too little to address, but our ROP will. Thank you for all that you have done and all the years of service. Our globally recognized success is your legacy. Though please don't walk away now. Please stand up and fight for our region and the sustainable visionary regional official plan that our citizens are counting on for the future. We already have a better plan than our misguided premier, and we all know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Questions?
Any questions to Mr. Thomason? Okay.
Thank you.
Seeing none, thanks, Kevin. The next delegation is Mark Reeser. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Mark Reeser, and good afternoon to everyone. I farm in Wilmot Township, and I'm presenting today in my capacity as Vice President of the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture. In 1973, we began a journey here in Waterloo, a journey to build the most innovative urban community in Canada, and at the same time, protect and enhance a flourishing and productive agricultural countryside. The tool to do that was two-tier regional government and regional planning. Regional government was the tool that allowed us to partner with the GRCA to establish the Regional Water Quality Program, now recognized as one of the best water and soil conservation programs in North America. Regional government was the tool that enabled the establishment of the countryside line to protect farmland. The environmentally sensitive landscape designation to protect the integrity of major tributaries of the Grand River, the protected countryside designation and the identification of groundwater recharge areas to protect our aquifer, ensuring that we are able to remain the largest municipal user of groundwater in Canada, an effective and efficient public transit system not found in any comparably sized city in North America. And it was regional government that allowed us to build the best urban and rural planning regime in Canada by hiring the very best people and supporting them as they laid and continue to lay the best framework for the most vibrant, innovative, dynamic, and prosperous community in North America, period. I'm here today to bring an agricultural perspective to the discussion regarding our official plan and pending changes to provincial planning policy. To thank you for all that you have done and to encourage you, both elected and staff, to continue to plan well, protect what is good, and set an example for the rest of Ontario, and if I may boldly say, the rest of Canada. We live in a very special place here in Waterloo Region. I think you already know that. It is arguably the most innovative, dynamic, and prosperous urban municipality in Canada. At the same time, surrounding the urban footprint is one of the most fertile, productive, and prosperous agricultural communities in Ontario, if not Canada. Today, as we contemplate the future of Waterloo Region and the impending passage of Bill 23, we are essentially at a fork in the road. Do we backtrack and give in to those who think that the solution to growth is sprawl? Or do we continue our visionary planning process that protects rural lands for agriculture, local food production, groundwater recharge, habitat for biodiversity, respects people's different and changing housing needs, ensures affordability, and is truly sustainable? The growth plan option recommended by staff that you approved almost unanimously several months ago recognizes and accommodates the need to provide a choice in housing type in the context of livable, complete communities. It conforms with the provincial government's requirements for the necessary land to facilitate growth, while at the same time it protects farmland and the environment. It chooses to protect farmland and the natural landscape. It chooses to provide an affordable place for people to live and work. It chooses to address the need to provide housing for all. It respects the implications of our changing climate, and it provides a practical, attainable, flexible, and affordable alternative to sprawl. Our planning regime here in Waterloo should be the template for planning in all of Ontario, not Bill 23. The evidence of our planning success surrounds us. 3 thriving cities, 3 universities, employment opportunities that other municipalities can only dream of, and some of the best food-producing land on the continent. The province doesn't have to invent anything new. We've already done it for them. Don't be seduced, intimidated, or coerced by those who say that we have no choice but to endorse sprawl, or those who try to promote sprawl by renaming it. It doesn't matter if the developer is here from Waterloo, it's the one down the road, or the premier of this province. We do have a choice. We really do. There is always a choice, and today I encourage you to continue to choose wisely. Choose to build a community that will be a place that not only you, but your children and your grandchildren and their children will want to live and work in. Regional government, innovative policies, prudent and visionary planning all advance the vision of a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable Waterloo region that respects both the landscape and those that live in it. In conclusion, thank you again, staff and councillors. And I'm speaking on behalf of my constituents in rural Waterloo. Thank you. Thank you for what you've done over the past 48 years since 1973. And what you do today and what you will be called upon to do in the future. Continue to be courageous as you make tough and difficult choices. Don't lie down, don't roll over, and don't acquiesce. Be bold, be visionary, and don't be afraid to innovate. And never, ever stop responding forcefully and eloquently to those with resources and those in power. And finally, remember there is only one landscape, and that people, the natural environment, and agriculture all have to share it. All the best to you, and thank you especially to those who are not returning. And I will say to those who are incoming, you have big shoes to fill. looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions, Mr. Reeser? Seeing none, we'll carry on to the next delegation then. That's Kevin Eby. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, my name is Kevin Eby. I'm a resident of Waterloo. I was last in this chamber 8 years ago, and weirdly, I still feel at home. I was the Director of Community Planning from 2000 to 2015, and I'm here today to speak to Bill 23. Next slide, please. The stated purpose of 23 is to build 1.5 million homes by 2031 to accommodate growth and alleviate existing shortfalls. Next slide, please. This target is being used to justify huge changes, including the elimination of the regional official plan and regional planning. And apparently, the province feels that the regional planning services have little value to the community and are actually a drag on the housing market. Next slide, please. So what does regional planning do? And I think I can speak with a bit of authority to this. There are two really key functions of regional planning, which include coordination and innovation. Next slide, please. And I think the coordination end, one of the most important, and I'm not going to speak to all of these, is the translation of the provincial or GGH-wide policies to the region of Waterloo. We fought hard as staff to get some of the things that were important to you as council, to vary the interpretations that provincial staff had of policies so they fit here in the region of Waterloo. The next big one would be integrating growth management and infrastructure planning, an absolutely key function for the region. Next slide, please. And innovation in spades in this place. You have been courageous. You have done the right things in so many cases. You've won awards from the American Planning Association. You've won them from the Canadian. You've won them from Ontario's planning group. There are so many things that have come out of Waterloo that are now done in other parts of the province or other parts of Canada that you should be very proud for. You took the chance to break ground on so many of these. Next slide, please. So it's really important to understand that the community and the local economy here have benefited big time from state-of-the-art planning, and nowhere is anybody better positioned to navigate the future challenges than here in the region of Waterloo. Next slide. So how has it failed the housing market so badly it's now to be disbanded? Apparently, the region has not approved enough greenfield land to accommodate growth, and we're obviously, you were so slow in approval processes that the home building industry simply couldn't keep up to demand. Well, somebody thinks that, but that's not what the facts say. Next slide. If you look at greenfield development, the approved amounts, on average, since 2006, there's been 19,256 approved units in the greenfield areas. Next slide, please. If your interest is just in singles and semis, on average, in registered unbuilt lots, there's been about 2,700 available each year on average. And overall, we're upwards in the 8,000 territory. So there has been plenty of singles as well. Next slide, please. And in fact, when you take a look at what's been built versus what's available, if you look first at the total greenfield, you've averaged 19,200 plus lots approved in the greenfield. The home building industry has built 1,722 on average, which is 9% of what's been approved. If you just look at singles and semis, you've had in excess of 8,700 available on average. in approved plans. The home building industry has built 1,273 on average, or 15% of the approved singles and semis. And if you just look at registered singles lots that they can get a building permit on tomorrow, they've only built half of those on average in any given year. Next slide, please. Actually, next slide. I've covered two of them and another. So this is in addition to the about 80,000 to 100,000 housing capacity in the built-up areas that Watson found and doing the LNA for you, most of which have existing planning permissions in place. There is a boatload of housing potential in the region of Waterloo. Next slide, please. The ROP and regional planning are proposed to be eliminated through Bill 23 because they're a drag on the construction of homes. Yet since 2006, the home builders average construction of only 9% of the average number of approved homes in the greenfield areas. Next slide. There is a housing shortage. No one is denying that, but clearly the ROP and regional planning are not the problem. And I think we all need to get on with recognizing what are the solutions. We've got to find them, we've got to implement them. And Councillor Galloway, if I can just have another minute, I would like to personally extend my thanks to council. There's a lot of you here who were in the trenches back when I was standing up here proposing things like ESLs and regional recharge areas and countryside line. And thank you very much for having the courage to move forward with those types of initiatives. The community here is much better for your efforts. And you don't hear that enough. You probably have the worst job around, except for maybe Danielle's job or Rod's job, as they're the ones the public sometimes aren't kind to. But I just want you to know it is appreciated, and it was an honor to work with you, and I am so proud of the things we accomplished, and hopefully they'll still be there in a short period of time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin, for the kind words in your presentation. There are a couple questions, Kevin. It appears. Councillor Jaworski.
I'm used to running away.
There you go. Thank you. And through the chair, my only disappointment in your presentation was none of those spectacular photographs that Kevin has shared with me from before.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a question leveraging your independence, but having a planning background and information on how planning works in Ontario. What tools are available to municipalities, lower and upper tier, to cause development to giddy up? Right? We have this legacy of approved lots, approved building, but to my knowledge, we don't have a lot of tools to incent that to be built.
Yeah, and I think there are tools available. I think some of them are proposed through the ROP with looking at the missing middle, looking at accessory units. Those are going to be key going forward. Obviously, the market has changed, and I don't think the development industry has recognized it's changing as quickly as it is. And so that's why we continue to chase single detached lots and expansions to greenfield areas when, quite frankly, there obviously isn't a market out there if they had that many approved lots. I think inclusionary zoning, one of the big disappointments, and one of the big cautions to you is if you just simply throw money at the development industry through cuts in development charges, cuts in fees, unless there's a way that you can guarantee that that's passed on, in fairness, it's a free market economy and they'll sell houses for whatever the market will bear. And so, is the incentive going to them or is it going to the homeowner? And the inclusionary zoning provisions were one way that you could actually guarantee you were at least getting affordable housing that was going to be there for a period of time. For the government to restrict that to 5%, I actually thought they had it backwards. I thought they were saying, well, you know, if you want your big lot singles, you have to keep that to 5%. I was totally stunned when I realized they actually meant the best provision in some respects in the Planning Act. They were restricting it down to 5% at a very time when it's likely one of the best ways to deliver affordable housing. So, long answer, I apologize for that.
No, thank you very much.
Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if you would just indulge me on a couple of comments. All three of the delegations that are here this evening or this afternoon have been incredibly important, not just to the region, but for the province. During my time as Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry, we delivered on mandate due in part to the support that we had from these three individuals here that have spoken to us this afternoon and the region of Waterloo. And that work included the modernization of the Conservation Authorities Act, the Aggregate Resources Act in 2017. We completed the mapping of the natural heritage systems in the province. Our biodiversity system was launched in 2017. We identified 1 million acres of pollinator lands. We looked at provincially significant wetland protection strategies and reinforced it. We also worked very closely on invasive species, threatened and endangered species, protection of habitat. We also look to lake and riverbed protections with the work done on nitrates and trying to prevent those from entering our water systems and our lake and river systems. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that we have seen not only in the region and in these last 4 years as we took that work that was done provincially and have made sure that we've been innovative here in the region. And I have to say, in all three levels of government that I've sat at in the last 8 years, I know that I couldn't have delivered on my mandate in the province, nor as a councillor here and mayor of Cambridge, without the work that has gone on here. The passionate delivery, the passionate sentiments that you delivered this afternoon are something that I'm extraordinarily proud of, and I know that we have been making waves, not just provincially and nationally, but some of our work has been recognized internationally, and my hat's off to you. With all of that said, I do have one quick question for you, Kevin, and you know this is going to be debated for a while, but what are the main reasons that only 9% of identified projects have been built to date?
I think honestly, there's obviously some complications in the housing market, the economy, or the economics must not work perfectly for the housing industry. But I think the main thing is in the Greenfield area that the market changed. And I candidly had one of the larger developers around one time about 3 years ago say to me, I can't find anybody to buy a single. And, you know, we've been saying that for a long time. And the market has changed for a whole number of reasons, not the least of which the aging population, the aging baby boomers, are starting to turn over their housing. And if you go to 2016, there were 77,800 singles owned by people that will be over 80 years of age in 2051. 77,000. To give context to that, we've only built 18,000 since 2006. And so the housing market of the future is not going to look anything like the housing market of the past, because the past is starting to recycle. The other reason I think is that there's been some holdups, in fairness, that some of the developers have been held up by other developers who haven't extended the services through their properties. I think that's part of it. But the latest one, honestly, was best summed up by one of the developers who spoke at the Woolwich Council meeting not that long ago, who when asked whether they built the max that was permitted in Woolwich under their official plan in the Breslau area, he said, well, no, because we're holding on to our land to meet our long-term business objectives. And I think that is one thing that's happening, is that people are recognizing where they used to, develop a 500-unit subdivision, take 300 units and sell it to small builders, develop the other 200 or build them themselves, and then move on to their next piece of land. I think they're beginning to understand they may not get another piece of land. And so they're rolling the land onto the market in accordance with their long-term business plans rather than market demand. And so you've got, it's so complex. There are so many things at work in the housing market right now. And about the only thing I can tell you is it's not the regional plan's fault, and it's not regional planning's fault.
Thank you.
Councillor Erb?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably most others will know the answer to this question, but do municipalities in Ontario have a sunset clause in the that the development has to take place in a certain period of time? Or is that something that would be provincially mandated?
There is the ability to impose that at this point in the Planning Act. That came in after I left the region, so rather than stick my foot in my mouth, I'd rather refer to either Rod or Danielle for an answer on that. But it certainly is a part of the future that we need to get to. If it's kind of a use it or lose it provision when it comes to approvals.
And would that be any one of the tiers that could do that? I don't know, Mr. Rogier, you want to respond?
Mr. Rogier?
In the case of the City of Kitchener, those approvals are already delegated to the city, so that would be entirely within the scope of that city's decision authority. We haven't used that tool up to this point. It's something that may be useful to consider in the future, but we've been cautious about that. I think generally speaking, municipalities have been cautious about implementing that tool because there's a significant sunk cost in establishing a plan of subdivision, and to simply stale date it at some point, it's not without implications that would need to be studied carefully.
Thank you. Councillor Foxton.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Just to Jim's comment, so at the township, when you apply to do a subdivision or whatever, and all your documentation's in, at a certain time period, so you put down your money, your finances, and everything else as a reserve, and if your documentations are coming to an end, you have to start all over the whole process. You lose everything. So my staff keep on the developers and say, if you want this to happen, you have till this date or everything stops and you start from scratch again. So that is in process. But as Kevin said, with the drop in the market, with the increase in interest rates, so housing is not moving, and they're going to increase the interest rate again. So you look at the cost of a house. So I asked my CAO, on a $700,000 house, 0.5% interest is $75 a month. Now, houses in North Dumfries none of them sold for under $1 million. So it's gone up 2.5%. People had maxed themselves out to buy in North Dumfries. In fact, I know of a few families that had their parents and their grandparents second mortgage their houses to buy the house. And now, so it's in a really tight situation, which has stalled the whole market.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. The next delegation is Mr. Sam Nabby. Sam from Hold the Line, Waterloo Region. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Chair Galloway and members of the committee. My name is Sam Nabby. I'm here talking on behalf of Hold the Line Waterloo Region. We're an organization that promotes public support of the countryside line, and we've worked with farmers, developers, councillors, arts organizations, and neighbors all across Waterloo Region to celebrate this policy tool that protects our groundwater, preserves farmland in our natural areas. There's been an incredible amount of political will around this horseshoe and in the area municipalities to achieve the countryside line and to keep it as a core part of the regional official plan, including the amendment that was just adopted this past summer. If our area municipalities continue to uphold this spirit of collaboration and not fall for the trap that the province has set for us to pit communities against one another, we can make sure that that spirit continues and that those protections continue, and that we keep fulfilling our identity as a region that has productive rural areas, productive, vibrant urban areas, and that these two communities can live together. I'm asking you to defend the countryside line again and to send a message to the province that our official plan amendment fulfills the need for new housing. Our staff report today mentioned that we have the capacity for 125,000 new homes, whereas the region, or the province, has allocated us a target of 70,000. Our regional official plan is fulfilling the provincial vision for that 1.5 million over 10 years. We are well on our way, and as we heard from other speakers, the land is available. This official plan and the concept of regional planning is not what's holding up people getting into homes in our community. This bill allows some new intensification and allows triplexes everywhere, for example. The staff report today welcomes that, and that's something that I support and that Hold the Line supports as well. We need more forms of gentle intensification in our communities. But we can go further. We can go further by allowing missing middle housing as well. The neighborhood missing middle policies are excellent, and they allow everything up to low-rise apartment buildings, and we should be seeing that in neighborhoods across the region. Combined with our policies on bedroom size and mix of bedrooms, we can make sure that we provide areas for families to be living in different types of housing, whether it's in the townships, whether it's in Cambridge, Kitchener, or Waterloo. And we can do that while welcoming all the new neighbors who want to make Waterloo Region home. The province is trying to claim that we need to choose sprawl over protecting the environment, sprawl over protecting tenants' rights, sprawl over provisions for affordability, but we do not need to throw those policies out. And I would like to see our local leaders stand up for that and have another round of telling the province, as we did with Bill 66, as we did throughout defending our regional official plans this time and last time, that we can work with the province to show them that we know how to grow our community in a sustainable way with housing choice while protecting our environment. There's going to be a loss of revenue through exemptions in development charges, community benefits charges, parkland fees, if Bill 23 passes, as well as a loss of affordable housing that we can require through inclusionary zoning. That means that the region and area municipalities need to get creative with our land and with our assets. Now is not the time to sell off land for a one-time bump in our budget. I think if the province is going down this road, we need to think critically about long-term, predictable, ongoing revenue. That could look like the region considering building mixed-income housing on land that it owns, which would be able to sustain itself financially as a project while providing much-needed affordable housing in perpetuity. Our capacity to accommodate 125,000 homes on land that is already allocated for development has been shown through the land needs assessment, through the staff report. And we adopted this new official plan after extensive consultation with municipalities, with residents, with First Nations, a lot of back and forth with provincial staff. So if the province decides to strike some of those provisions, if they decide to strike the countryside line from the official plans that have now been devolved to the local tiers, it's not because we didn't provide enough housing, and it's not because this region has failed to welcome all the people that want to call Ontario home and that want to call Waterloo Region home. So Hold the Line Waterloo Region will always defend the concept of the countryside line, and we will never say that we have to accommodate new growth on the backs of tenants or on the backs of of the environment. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam. Okay, see no names here, so we'll move on to our last delegation, and that's Greg Mikalenko, Treasurer of the Grand River Environmental Organizations. And Greg, you have 3 minutes to present. Welcome, Greg.
A Grand River Environmental Network has existed for about 20 years. We choose to regard the whole watershed as an integrated feature, and thankfully one that's had good governance, whether it's from the individual municipalities, regional government, conservation authorities, the First Nations, and so on. I'm here to back completely what the other speakers have said, so I won't go into that. I'm appalled, and we are appalled by what the provincial government is trying to do. Oops, better get my reading glasses on. We have some special concerns about the conservation areas. We've been very fortunate to have the Grand River Conservation Authority. In 2000, the Grand River Conservation Authority was selected as the recipient of the most prestigious international award for river basin management, the Thies International River Prize. So Mark Riosor was a little modest, not just the leader in North America, but for the whole world. And it was cited for its outstanding achievement in river management and innovations in science, technology, planning, policy, and very importantly, stakeholder partnerships. A scientific review of it in the Journal of Water Science Technology lauded it. Winning the 2000 International River Prize resulted from a significant investment by the community of Ontario over a long period of time in the Grand River Conservation Authority. Innovative partnerships with the business community, government, universities, First Nations, environmental groups, and the general community have been the hallmark of a broad-based river management program that has returned the Grand River to a healthy environment and viable resource. Not content with the achievements of the past, the GRCA has turned its attention to the future needs of this river system and to increasing the depth and breadth of community partnerships. I wrote that about a year and a half ago when the provincial government introduced a new bill limiting the powers of the conservation authorities. So now, not content with having disabled and maimed the conservation authorities, despite the fact that they're world leaders in the field of river basin management, they've dragged out the poor crippled carcass of it and thrown it under a second bus. And this time I sorrow for it. A second thing that I've done very recently is there is now a hearing under the Local Planning Appeals Act tribunal by a regional developer who's contesting the development up near Herbsville and the Cartway development. It concerns an obsessive wish by this particular developer to put 14 mansions in a space of 5 hectares sitting in the middle of a swampy forest, and has defied the city of Waterloo, its intentions to do something far more reasonable, such as ecologically restore the whole area. The OMB, which is now the LPAT, was thoroughly reformed a number of years ago, primarily after a workshop meeting convened in Kitchener with over 1,550 concerned local people, worked hard all night, came up with some very fine reforms which were put into a new act, which has now been rescinded by the Premier. The result of this, I was a participant at the recent hearings.
Greg, if you could wrap up, please.
Okay. It cost the city of Waterloo about 1,500 hours of work by its staff, probably a cost of $800,000 to $1 million. Also, the regional staff were involved too. And this is a kind of disaster that results from this heavy-handed way of reorganizing things. I'd like to commend staff, councillors, past and present, mayors, for your dedication, for your spirited work and working across many boundaries, and of recognizing the wealth of information and that can come from voluntary organizations in the public sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, Councillor Foxton.
Can I talk now, sir, Chair?
Is that?
Through the chair, can I speak now?
Is this a question to the delegation, or?
No, this is not to the delegation.
Okay, yeah, now we can start into a general commentary. Yes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to mention to the group that I was invited to the AMO, which is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, policy on regards to Bill 23. We discussed many issues. Aggregate, of course, they're basically going to have free reign. Interest groups will no longer be recognized. So all of the lobby groups for aggregate will not be recognized. Individuals may speak at meetings, but not anyone else. What was the most disheartening for me was the conservation authorities and the loss of their ability to speak on any planning issues. They will not be allowed to make comments or any stipulations. They will be allowed now, builders will be allowed to build on the wetlands. Now, as you heard Rodrigo speak, our groundwater is essential to Waterloo region. 90% of our drinking water comes from our groundwater. Now, if you build on the wetlands, that water can't seep into the ground. And therefore, you have different types of flooding, similar to what happened in Texas a few years ago, where they had built a whole community on wetlands, and it flooded, wiped out all of the communities, but the water had nowhere to go. How will that impact the water for Waterloo region? I think it's a tremendous impact. So this morning, on behalf of the AMO group, I said I would ask insurance companies, would they insure homes that are built on wetlands? They weren't sure they would, and that they're not forced to. They are forced to insure cars, but not homes. But the catch-22 for a person who buys a home on a wetland is usually you buy your home first and then you check the insurance afterwards. Well, if you've bought on a significant wetland area and the insurance won't cover you, the bank won't give you a mortgage. So we've created sort of this cycle, but the most essential thing is to protect our water. And I said to the committee, if Waterloo region does not have the water runoff that we require, then we have to look again at a pipeline to the Great Lakes at billions of dollars, if at all it's even possible anymore. So it's a dire situation. Now, the group I was with at AMO yesterday do have booked an appointment with the subcommittee to talk on these issues, of which we will be addressing these. But the groundwater, to me, is hugely significant. And for the speakers about the protection of the countryside lines, regardless of where planning goes, you have 7 mayors here that have backed the planning that you have put forward, and we will continue to do so. Regardless of how this act plays out, I think we will still work together because we still value our country and our province and our communities. And to value that is to respect the land that we hold so dear. So interesting things are happening. I believe Chair Redmond is also doing it with a different policy group for AMO tomorrow. And there's 10 different schedules, of which we're commenting on 7 of them. And it's an interesting thing, the province. We have to, but we have to make our voices heard, but logically, not attacked. They're not a group to take attacks well. They shut right down at attack. But logic can penetrate, and some of them will speak out for logic. So we have to be very logical and methodical, and we've got all the data behind us.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Foxton. So that concludes the staff presentation, the delegations. If anybody has any comments they want to make, they can do so now. There is no recommendation in this report. It is as it's written. So if anybody wants to say anything in regards to it, now is the time. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Chair Galloway. I agree that there needs to be a lot more work done with this bill. There needs to be a lot more discussion. There's a lot of stuff in here that needs to be fixed. I think that what the government needs to do is they could come to Wilmot and see a brand new wetlands project that will be open in April. There will be a grand opening. Everybody can come and have a look. They've done a fantastic job there. So there's a good example of what the province could follow and maybe direct other areas to work on their wetlands like that. And the other point I want to make is that the planning matters. Our staff have been in discussion about taking over certain planning matters for 20 years. And the problem I have is that why this discussion took 20 years when it could have been done a long time ago, because as Councillor Foxton said, our 7 communities and the region work cooperatively and we work really well together. And we also maintain, I mean, there was a talk about during the ROP discussion was about the countryside line. Well, there wasn't any discussion in Wilmot about losing the countryside line. We don't want it. We wouldn't want it. Matter of fact, I think a few years ago, I volunteered to stand at the Wilmot line with my musket and keep Waterloo at bay. So it's been a tough talk, but you're right. There is an awful lot of discussion needs to happen. There is an awful lot of stuff here that needs to be pushed back on the province because they need to come and understand that we can do the job. As we've been explaining to the planning department of the region, we have staff that can do the job. And they are very adamant and very sincere about planning in the township of Wilmot. And they've done a great job, and our official plan speaks of that, of what we're all talking about. So I do think that there needs to be a lot more discussion, and hopefully we can push the province to, to bend, not just an ear, but to bend at the knee a bit and come backwards. So they do need to, because you're right, the conservation needs to be protected. We need that greatly, because the GRCA has done such a fantastic job of turning an almost dead river system into a worldwide destination. So it's extremely important that they're allowed to continue to do that, and that we're allowed to continue to do the great work that has been done here. So let's hope it keeps going. And I just know that in another week's time, I'm not going to have a phone number. So thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And above and beyond some of the obvious things that this chamber seems to be concerned with source water protection, the Conservation Authority changes, and all of the other things that we've talked about, the overwhelming cost to the municipalities is something that I would be concerned about going forward. When we were looking through the presentation, even the cost of expropriations, trying to expropriate either partial or full takings to put through the ION phase 2 into Cambridge, for instance, comes to mind. There's an awful lot of things that don't seem to be addressed in this particular legislation, and the cost is overwhelming. If you really look at some of the things that our taxpayers are expected to pay for right now, one of the things that comes to mind is social services. We're the only province of Canada that pays for social services through our property taxes, such as public health, paramedics, housing, and the like. And here we are, caught in one of the worst times of our generation, with homelessness, the rise of mental health and opioid addictions, and we've never seen anything like it. It's unprecedented, and it has fallen to us here at the municipalities and the region to put forward a homelessness master plan in order to try and pick up the costs that really our provincial government should be paying for. And I worry about the cumulative effects. If you look at some of the changes in this particular bill that may go forward, and the reduction of development fees and charges, how are we then going to not only manage social service, a social issue that's overwhelming to all municipalities right now? It's our number one ask at big city mayors and at the province table. But how are we going to then fund some of the things that we're looking forward to? I look for, as an example, to the North Cambridge Business Park, and Cambridge taxpayers have helped to fund $56 million of servicing to those lands, which are provincially significant employment lands that are going to help not just the city of Cambridge and the region, but the province. So it worries me in future that there seems to be no mechanism from the provincial government's point of view to look to the provincial and the municipal budgets. And who's got an eye on our overwhelming cumulative things that municipalities are paying for? Certainly Mr. Dyer here will be. Certainly the municipalities are. But there seems to be a blind eye at the provincial level to really look to what the costs are of a municipality who has to actually manage a budget and keep it balanced for the year. We're the only ones that do that. So I guess my question would be to Mr. Dyer, is there some kind of move through some of the financial officers, municipality-wise, that are looking to the overwhelming costs that we're being faced with right now as a region to sort of ensuring that the provincial government is aware that there's eventually going to be a point at which that the municipalities can't pay for growth and actually get some of the goals that the province is looking for actually built in our community, such as housing?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I would say a couple of things. The first is that there is absolutely a concerted effort underway right now amongst the regional and single-tier municipalities, for the most part, to attempt to quantify for the province the implications of the specific changes in Bill 23 as they relate to the Development Charges Act and the Planning Act from the perspective of both parkland dedication fees and community benefits charges. So we're attempting to come up with some reasonable ways of estimating the impacts. In some cases, it's a forward-looking estimate. In other cases, it's looking back at, what would have happened in the last 5 years had these provisions been in place? How would development charge revenues have been impacted? So we're working our way through that and meeting at least a couple of times before this week is out to try to keep that effort moving forward. The other part of the answer, I think, would relate back to a resolution that this council passed, I'm going to say a couple of years ago, with respect to advocacy to the province in order to begin a review of the provincial municipal funding relationship. Because as you correctly stated, we are somewhat of an anomaly in this country with respect to the requirement to fund a number of let's say, social services and services for which there are broad social equity objectives across the entire province. That is unusual in this country, and it's certainly problematic from a municipal perspective as we take on more. At least it appears that we take on more and more the responsibility and the funding for affordable housing, for subsidized housing, for homelessness programs, for all the services that you mentioned in your original question. So I think, and certainly look to the guidance from the new council, but the incoming council. I think that's something that the incoming council should reiterate, and something that this council will be dealing with very soon through the 2023 budget. The impact of the cost of those services is going to be front and center, and so if these changes were to go through and more of the cost of growth falls onto the existing taxpayer, that will have clear implications for other regional services as council will make decisions about which infrastructure can be built, growth related versus the infrastructure that we already have, and how does it impact the funding of other services. So I would say this is top of mind for CFOs, certainly across the regional and single tiers, and likely at the local level as well.
Thank you. And if I could just follow up and just say that this is probably the time where all of the other agencies that speaks for municipalities, AMO, the Ontario Big City Mayors, FCM, should be continuing to speak with that coordinated voice to the province so they understand the cumulative effects of some of the policies that they're trying to rush through. Thank you.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just maybe a couple of observations. I think that obviously the province is trying to develop some mechanisms why, so that we can get more housing to the market. We obviously have a housing crisis. We have affordable housing crisis, affordability crisis with respect to housing. So I think that, they're trying to do something using their policy levers to get more houses to the market. And I think that I would say they got it partially right, but by putting into place this bill, they've really thrown out the long-standing kind of planning principle that growth pays for growth. And the idea that we would take development charges and reduce the amount of money that we charge to developers to build houses, which pays for all the infrastructure, and put that onto the tax base, I think that they've really underestimated the impact that that's going to have on local ratepayers. And, once local ratepayers start to see that they are, experiencing double-digit tax increases over and above the budgetary pressures the region's facing right now, double-digit tax increases to pay for more growth, I think that they're going to have some second thought about how this legislation is put into place. And hopefully we don't get to that point and we're able to make some amendments before it comes into reality. I do think that there's an opportunity for us to speed up the planning process. Over the years I've talked to developers, and the average time it takes for development approvals is extensive, not only in the region of Waterloo, but right across Ontario and indeed other jurisdictions in Canada. You just look at the regulatory approvals. You got the regions, you got the cities, you got the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans, you have utilities. I'm probably missing 2 or 3 that have commenting abilities in any kind of zoning application or plans of subdivision. So I think it's important to recognize that there's things that we can do to speed up the planning process. But then it also, is very interesting to see Mr. Eby's report, because I'd often ask this question of staff about, building permits and as a measure of activity and success. But, how long are some of these developers sitting on these building permits? And so that is the quintessential problem, really, is that gap between building permits being granted and how much units are being built. And why aren't those units being built? Well, for a variety of market forces, financing of the developer, market forces generally in the retail housing market, changes in demographics. But it's also related to, and I know this firsthand, the availability of people to build the houses and build the infrastructure. And, you know, in my experience, the construction industry, right now, we're having tremendous pressure in terms of finding people to build the infrastructure that's already in the works, let alone to build 1.5 million new houses in the next 5 to 7 years. So it's a very complex problem at a variety of different levels. I think that the province is trying to, you know, attach a blunt instrument that's something that needs to have more sharp and precision policy related to it. So that would be my observations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Great segue from Councillor Strickland. I would just say any omnibus bill of this size needs to be delved into. And Mr. Dyer's already talked about the fact that Marco members and certainly our outstanding CFOs for single and two-tier municipalities, as well as our planning staff, have really seized themselves with what kind of information we can take to the government. So I know Councillor Foxton referenced I'm chair of Marco as well as chair of a planning committee that's been in place for over 2 years, and we will continue to look at how we can go to the government identifying unintended consequences as well as ways that can be improved, as well as the fact that there are some things in this bill that we don't object to. There are some things that Councillor Strickland talked about, you know, digitization, streamlining of processes. I mean, all of those things we think is positive because we do agree that we want to build more houses. So I just want to alert this council, and I'll certainly carry the message forward to the new council, that I will continue to advocate on behalf of not just the region of Waterloo, but also my Marco colleagues, making sure that we're unpacking this bill in a way that's helpful to the government and recognizing that one of the key issues, I think, is going to be continuing consultation on those unintended consequences and how we can improve things that may be detrimental to the people that we all represent.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Not to belabor a number of points that have been made by my colleagues, but I just wanted to maybe add that my concern is that we're trying to fix the wrong problem. There are a number of issues in the bill that we do need to address, as has been said, but you know, we've demonstrated here in our ROP process that we do work together, we work collaboratively, and all levels of government are represented here. We've shown today, or Mr. Eby showed today, that the numbers are there to provide the housing, and concern that the numbers are not going to go back to the buyers where they're planned to be. So I think here, at least in Waterloo Region, we have demonstrated that we know how to work together, and this bill will cause more problems, I think, than it does solve. Our public consultation is one thing that hasn't been spoken about, but I think with the timing that is put into this bill, you're going to see less and less public consultation, not just with places like GRCA where it's taken away, but also with our public. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Babanovic.
Thanks very much, Chair Galloway, and a lot of great points being made today, and I just want to thank the delegations for the presentations that they've made. This is a topic, as Chair Redmond has indicated, that is taking up a fair bit of time amongst all of our elected colleagues across the province. In fact, later this week, there's been a urgent member of the Ontario Big City Mayors that's been called, and I know FCM is also broadly looking at this issue because we're seeing a variety of omnibus bills being introduced by various provincial and territorial governments across the country in different ways than we've seen before, and that's starting to cause some concerns amongst local government circles, whether it's on this particular issue or other similar issues. Obviously, you know, this is an issue and a challenge that we know, especially coming out of the recent elections that's a priority for our residents in terms of housing availability and housing affordability. And there's a variety of techniques that and tools that could be put in place, and quite frankly, supports that need to be put in place at enhanced levels from upper orders of government at the provinces and at the federal government in order to deal with these issues. I think it is something that's going to take a fair bit of time. It's going to require engagement and the opportunity for increased input from the public as we go forward. One of the things that does cause me the biggest degree of concern is the impact on our DCs. I was a little, quite frankly, a little disappointed and discouraged by some of the comments that I read recently in the media, where it was suggested that, local governments are getting all this money and doing nothing for it. I would suggest that community centers and libraries and roads and sewer pipes is hardly not anything for it. And that is not helpful commentary. I think we all need to be able to work together in order to address these issues and recognize that we all have a collaborative role to play in building a solution going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have one more speaker, Councillor Foxton.
Well, I'm glad I'm the last.
No, I'm last.
Oh, no. I would just like to say, how many years have you been chairing?
Oh, a few.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your leadership and your guidance and your assistance to all of us as we've come along in council. You've done an amazing job, as have your counterparts. And it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge you at this time, and my fellow councillors to acknowledge you and your dedication to the region. So thank you so much, Councillor Galloway. Very proud and honored to have worked with you.
Well, thank you. Okay, so if there are no others, I do want to speak. This is a pretty important matter, and I thought as chair of the Planning and Works Committee for a few years, I might have an opinion on Bill 23. So I did prepare some comments. First of all, I think it's very important, I think I've heard this over and over again here today, that we support the government in terms of its overall objective of trying to provide additional housing in our province, whether it's just general housing or affordable housing or low-cost housing or whatever. We definitely support that, and indeed our new ROP amendment went a long way to deal with that particular problem. So it's not as if we've ignored it. We indeed embraced those objectives previously, and certainly we can identify with what the provincial government is trying to do. There are some good things in this bill. Although some of the inclusionary zoning limits are quite modest, at least they're a start, and hopefully they can be expanded over time, both in terms of percentage of units and the length of time that units would be committed for. Probably need to be worked on, but at least for 25 years or so, we have the possibility, the lower tiers particularly, have the possibility of including those kinds of provisions in some of their plans. The streamlining of the development approval process is never a bad thing, and so there are some things that this bill allows in that regard. But for me, there are four main problems with the bill, or the premises that go into the bill. And the first is that lower cost to builders by reducing the development charges, parking land dedication, the community benefit contributions, et cetera, will lower the cost of new units to the public. There's very little evidence that this will happen, particularly in an overheated market when there's a demand for units, as opposed to what happened back in 2007, 2008, when we had the housing crisis. And prices actually went down, and margins for builders subsided significantly, and many home builders went out of business, and that's the market. And so to suggest that pricing will come down because development charges and such other expenses developers are going to be reduced is really not rooted in any kind of evidence, certainly not historically. The market works as the market works. The loss of the DCs and parkland dedication revenues will have a very detrimental effect on municipalities' ability to provide the servicing needed to open up the new units. Either the servicing will not be provided to support the sufficient new units, or property taxes and user rates will have to increase significantly to replace that revenue in order to have the servicing that's required for the new units. And if the government goes through with this bill, it really should initiate some kind of an infrastructure program for municipalities using their consumption and income tax revenues so that low-income seniors and other lower-income homeowners are not driven out of their homes because of property tax and utility rate increases. There's a distinct possibility that reducing these revenues may lead to fewer units actually being built. The second problem I see with the bill is that providing more DGA, designated greenfield area, as they now have done in Hamilton and Ottawa, and I don't know if their circumstances are the same as ours, but we have plenty of DGA. It may be a problem elsewhere, but we currently have land available for development for 35,000 units in DGA, in designated greenfield areas. Keep in mind that 60% of our new units is not in DGA. 60% of our new units is in brownfield or intensification circumstances. And of course, the Countryside Line and ION has created that switch in units, greenfield versus brownfield. Our problem, in part, and we've talked about this, others have talked about this, is that developers are not opening up their approved lands fast enough. We need ways in the Planning Act that will cause developers to build. And maybe municipalities who have the right should be putting in sunset clauses in plans of subdivision to say, well, if you don't build within whatever reasonable amount of time, then your plan of subdivision is somehow or another impacted. And we also need to understand, and I don't know again if this is common in other jurisdictions, one of our problems, I think, is we have too few large landowners, and there's not necessarily a lot of competition. And there are what I've referred to as developer wars that go on within our community, where for competitive reasons, one developer will hold up another developer because they won't cooperate on a stormwater management agreement. They won't allow pipe going through their property because they want to either leapfrog or hold up another developer. And I think that some tools have to be given to municipalities to prevent that from happening. We also see some developers do frivolous EA bump ups to prevent a competitive developer from moving forward with their plan of subdivision. And again, we need tools, the municipalities need tools to try to avoid that or prevent it from happening. The third problem I see is something that Councillor Strickland has raised, is that even if there's more lots somehow or another brought to market, and there's already thousands of those available, where are the human resources coming from to build these new homes? There aren't legions of construction workers sitting at home somewhere waiting for a call. And so the government needs a companion strategy on human resources. And I'm sure Councillor Strickland can talk much more eloquently about that, as he's a national expert on the matter. But there needs to be, that piece needs to be solved too. It's not just a matter of getting more land to market. Get all the land to the market you want. If there's nobody to build on it, you're not getting the units. The fourth concern is that the elimination of the ROP. I think one of the delegations indicated that regions were actually put together for planning purposes because the planning in larger urban areas had become dysfunctional, and problems for servicing. Everybody had their own wastewater treatment plants, water treatment plants, roads, and it all had to be coordinated, and so regions were created to do that. And so are we going to go back to that dysfunction? Well, probably not in short order, but over the period of time, this new legislation is going to pit the 7 municipalities against each other to some extent. If there's going to be limited resources to build roads, to provide for wastewater capacity, to provide for water capacity, who's going to get that capacity? Everybody's going to be looking for, the cities are going to have their quotas that they're going to have to meet in terms of new housing units. In order to build those housing units, they need wastewater capacity, they need sewer capacity, they need roads. Who's going to get those? And we've been able to, at the regional level, deal with that. And I think people here today have said we've dealt with that quite effectively. But without that kind of process, what is going to happen to us? Are we going to get back to that point in time when there's a certain dysfunction associated with that? Our dependence on groundwater is somewhat unique in the province. Indeed, it's unique in the country. And I think we have an argument that maybe unlike other regions, is a very important point to argue with the province, that if, one size doesn't fit all. Because what's happened is, as we understand it, there are problems in some regional municipalities that the government is trying to straighten out. And we know that we're not one of those regional municipalities in all likelihood. But groundwater is something that's very, very different in this community, and it needs to be dealt with differently. And I think the province needs to understand that. Now, one further concern I have that's not contemplated in the bill and is of particular importance to our region is our journey on reconciliation with our First Nations. And you might ask, why am I bringing that up? Well, you will remember that we had unprecedented engagement with our First Nations through the ROP amendment process recently. We established a very special rapport that was rooted in our reconciliation efforts as part of the calls to action. And that engagement led to 2 glowing letters of support, one from the Mississaugas of the Credit and one from Six Nations. These are unprecedented letters of support, never seen before. And what happens now if the Bill 23 goes through? Well, we're not sure. And I'm sure they're not sure, and I'm sure they're still giving consideration to what happens. But I'm very fearful that our rapport as the region with those particular communities, those First Nation communities, is going to be much more difficult to maintain through on a planning basis by 7 area municipalities. It's not to say the area municipalities can't do that, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to do it as 7 municipalities as opposed to us all coming together under one umbrella to put forward those reconciliation efforts with our First Nation communities. This is another possible unintended consequence, as Chair Redmond has indicated. Again, I understand the need for more housing. I don't think our region and the area municipalities are to blame for the crisis. are unprecedented initiatives like the Countryside Line, ESL's Protected Countryside, has shown that we have led provincial planning, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not reasonable, particularly in our case. I'm confident that the new council will cooperate with the province to the fullest extent to achieve the mutually identified housing objectives, which really are undeniable and something that we all certainly support. Okay, so with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Jowett, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And I guess we're moving right into